How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. Today is Wednesday, July 17th. Training camp is very much well underway. The Houston Texans became the first team to have their entire team report to training camp, so more teams will follow suit in the remainder of this week and next week as well. So exciting times are coming. Football is coming just around the corner, but on today's episode, we're not going to talk about training camp. We're going to talk about a lot about the AFC East and some topics surrounding those teams in that division. Starting off with some more talk about the Davante Adams potential trade to the New York Jets. I talked about it on Monday, but now Boomer Esiason, an NFL analyst, had some pretty interesting things to say about that topic, so I'm going to comment on that. Then also some more on the running back market. Saquon Barkley talked about the longevity and just the situation right now for all the running backs in the NFL, currently where it stands. And offensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills, Joe Brady, is trying to get Josh Allen to not be so much of Superman, but just trying to do things more routinely to keep him safe and to benefit the entire offense overall. Those topics and much more coming up on today's show. Before I start with the Davante Adams trade talks, I wanted to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments, to use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. By using that link that you see on your screen, I'm able to see your comment on my chat box or read it on air, and that way get your guys' thoughts on anything I say. It's a big help for this show and the network, so if you guys would, we'd greatly appreciate it if you'd use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, with any of your questions or comments on today's show. With that being said, though, we're going to jump right into the trade talks because I initially brought up this topic on Monday when I heard Breece Hall talk about it, Garrett Wilson talk about it, Aaron Rodgers even brought it up, and even today when I was scrolling through Instagram, I saw a report on one of the accounts that I follow that said Davante Adams made a statement that he wanted to make it clear if there was ever a chance that he'd want to reunite with anybody in the NFL, it would be Aaron Rodgers. But with that being said, his agent came out and sort of downplayed all the rumors that a trade is going to happen, that it is likely to happen. His agent is saying no. Davante Adams didn't say no. He did say, if it were to happen, it would be with Aaron. So I don't know. He's keeping the door open. But Boomer Esiason, I wanted to talk about him because he followed up the comments made by Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson with some of the things that he's hearing from his sources close to the New York Jets. If you're unfamiliar with Boomer Esiason, he was actually a former quarterback for the New York Jets and an NFL analyst nowadays, but he recently spoke on the WFAN morning show about the potential Davante Adams trade to the New York Jets, and he said some pretty interesting things that I have up on the screen for you guys to follow along with. He said, I'm hearing that this is going to happen. If it does happen, somewhere in late August, early September. I'm not sure about why it would take that long. And this is after, obviously, all those comments that I mentioned before, and even Davante Adams was first brought up this idea on the Up and Adams show, and he said that Aaron Rodgers was actually in his ear about it, about trying to reunite and get back together, because it seems like obviously Aaron would love that. Breece Hall would love that. Garrett Wilson obviously seems to also want to be part of that. But Davante Adams said that that is happening, that Aaron Rodgers is talking in his ear about it. But for right now, he didn't really say that anything's in the works or anything like that. He said he was focused on the Las Vegas Raiders. And it makes the most sense just because right now he is on the third year, or he's going to be entering the third year of that big 5-year, $141 million deal that he got only in 2022. So very much early in this process of trying to get himself out of that contract or just switching that contract over to the New York Jets, especially because of what the Raiders had to give up, but also I think Davante is obviously one of the cornerstones of this project that the Raiders are building right now. Having that established superstar is something that a lot of teams that are trying to rebuild can say that they have on their roster. So with having him, it definitely helps out a lot with the development maybe of Aiden O'Connell, taking the pressure off of some of the younger guys, and just getting some sort of life in that offense when you know you have a Hall of Famer, an established wide receiver, a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL on your team. But on the flip side of that, you could say that the Raiders are really not going anywhere right now with Davante. They're not really competing for playoff games, playoff spots, or anything like that without a quarterback, honestly. So on the flip side, you could say they might as well trade him right now while his value is still high. By doing that, they'll get more assets in the future, and then you could maybe draft a quarterback or go out and use it on a trade to acquire somebody else. In free agency next year, you free up some salary cap space. There are some benefits with either side of it, obviously keeping Davante and trading him, but I still find it a little doubtful just based on it almost seems like it's coming out of nowhere. I know probably this has been in the works, maybe for Aaron Rodgers, thinking that he would love this, but only recently now that we're heading into training camp in such a crucial period where the Raiders are building their offense obviously around Davante and they have this whole plan installed with him to then trade him away. One, it would cost a lot, and I don't know if the Jets can really afford to give up so much right now because it seems like they're on the brink already of having their roster, their main group of guys, and just making sure that this group carries them into the next 2 to 3 years. I'm not sure they have the capital to present to the Las Vegas Raiders to get them to trade away their best player on their team, but that's how I'm feeling initially on these talks. But Boomer Esiason continued on with that with some more statements, but before that he said that through his connections to the New York Jets, back when, if you remember, when Aaron Rodgers was first linked to the New York Jets, Boomer Esiason was one of the guys that really talked it up, was one of the voices in media that was really believing that it could happen. He brought all the facts, he brought what he was hearing from his sources, and it obviously ended up coming true. So if you're unfamiliar with Boomer Esiason, why would we trust him? Who is he? He has been close to the New York Jets previously, and I don't want to say predicted that Aaron Rodgers would be there, but he was a main believer in the fact that Aaron Rodgers would come. And initially, right from the start, he mentioned, reading in an article, that Aaron played against the New York Jets when he was still with the Packers. He very much liked what they were building over there, and he was one of the main and first people to bring up that idea that Aaron, somewhere in the near future, could be enticed by the New York Jets to potentially play on their team. Obviously, that ended up happening, so he does hold a little bit of credibility there, at least from me reading that, seeing how correct he was in the past. So I am taking it with a grain of salt with what he's saying, because to me, in just my mind, it doesn't make too much sense for me. I find it really hard for it to become true. But he continued on with some more statements about the Davante Adams trade, and he said, Davante is never going to come out publicly and say, I want to leave the Raiders, but you do hear in this wide receiver program on Netflix, if you guys haven't checked it out yet, where he does this, I got to get out of here before I get killed. He says that leads the viewer to believe that he wants out of Vegas, but I don't see him saying that publicly. And after that statement, he said, he added on that he could see it as a more of the behind-the-scenes thing. Maybe Davante Adams just mentioning it, hinting it to his agent, his displeasure with the Raiders currently. We've obviously all seen the frustrations. You don't have to have seen the Netflix series Receiver to know how frustrating of a season it was last year for Davante. You could have seen it in any Raiders game last year, most of them, when Jimmy Garoppolo was there, Aiden O'Connell, during the time with Josh McDaniels there as well. It was all really just a disaster in terms of standards from where Davante was used to, obviously playing with Aaron, to where he was with Las Vegas. It was very much a bad period for him. But on top of that, again, if it was just up to Davante, I think he would probably end up just being traded. If this was the NBA or something, and you could just say, I want to be traded, and it facilitated the whole process, then we could probably get into an area where, all right, what are the next steps to this happening? But in the NFL, you see it with Brandon Ayuk now that he's requested a trade. The 49ers aren't budging. They're not blinking about it at all. If he wants to get traded, it doesn't matter. They'll keep him. They want to keep him, and they could just not entertain anything because that's not how it works in the NFL. So the Raiders pretty much hold the cards here because he is just at the beginning of that contract. But again, it just seems unlikely to me hearing about it now. I have to see something really play out in training camp, like an outburst from Davante or just continual bad body language or something like that, just voicing his displeasure for me to actually believe this could happen, because until I see it from Davante, I can't really put too much stock in it. That's just me. But of course, you could see how the New York Jets sources, people that are close to the Jets, could be optimistic about it, and they could end up being true, or being right, I should say. But right now, I think it's in a gray area where we're hearing a lot of things and we're not seeing too much being played out. With training camp just coming just around the corner, like I mentioned to start the show, it would be a bad time, I think, for the Raiders to right away cut ties with this season. If you're trading Davante, you're clearly planning for the future. This season is almost out the window, and that doesn't really paint a good picture for the NFL if this team is just going to basically tank this year and just not really be taken seriously. So that's another thing that has to be considered in this trade for it to actually happen. And right away, if he was on the Jets, on paper, that team would be stacked from an offensive standpoint. But again, I still have my doubts around a lot of these all-star, unbelievable teams that are just insane on paper. But then once you get to the field to actually playing football, and I think football is the one sport where you could really see that it just isn't about having 3 all-star wide receivers, a great running back. That offensive line really is the biggest doubt for me, and that probably is the biggest determinant in the success of everything. If they protect Aaron, or if Aaron is constantly running around back there trying to fend for his life, it's not going to look good if Aaron can't throw to Davante, Garrett, or Mike Williams. So there's a lot of things that have to just happen. If this does happen, it doesn't really move the needle for me that much either. So I think the Jets, for me, have to prioritize other things before we talk about Davante. But this was always going to be a topic. Aaron clearly wants to play with Davante again. So if he pushes hard enough and this starts to gain a little traction, like I said, if I see some action getting done, maybe I'll start to believe it. But right now, I'm probably at a 6 out of 10 that I think that this could happen. But I want to know what you guys think. Leave your guys' thoughts. Will Davante be traded before the season starts? Are the Jets Super Bowl contenders if Davante goes over there? Let me know what you guys think in the live chat box or afterwards in the comment section. But that is the first segment. That'll wrap it up for the first segment. And we're going to go to our first break of the show. But when we return, we're going to talk about Saquon Barkley, mentioning the running back market right now, the whole narrative around running backs and their longevity in the game. He calls out some of the narratives around that, and he gives his input, as well as me giving my input on what he said around that topic. So stay tuned. We're going to come back to that topic when we return on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. Some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We are back here on the show to dive in more on the running back market and the running back perspective, you could say, around the NFL nowadays, because it's been put into question a lot with what do these running backs deserve. And if you've seen any of the episodes on Hard Knocks, you'll see how specifically the Giants really valued the position, how much they were willing to spend on it, and the diverse sides of opinions that it just creates on whether or not to pay a 27-year-old running back, and Saquon specifically, regardless if he's probably the top 2 best running back in the NFL. does his age really create that much of a difference? Then you look at the health issues as well. That's really where this stems, coming off of that, but also just me thinking of a question that I wanted to pose to you guys after I read some of the statements from Saquon Barkley. But this all, sort of was started when Saquon got that contract, is being paid about $12.5 million per year. I want to say he got a 3-year, $37 million deal, if my math adds up to that. But the issue with that was that he was 27 years old. The Giants valued him at a certain price, but clearly it just wasn't enough for them to really pull the trigger. They let him test free agency, and the Eagles had no problem about it. They paid him, and now the Giants are going to have to see him twice a year because of the decision that they made, that the age plus the injury history for Saquon scared him off a little bit. And it's not just them. I think it scares off a lot of teams. And just this narrative around running backs that once they hit 27, 28, people on these organizations or just teams in general would rather take their chances on a cheaper 3rd round, 2nd round, even 4th or 5th round running back to give them the same amount of production, basically, in their mind, right? In their mind, for their running backs, because most running backs fall into that category of very good until a certain age, and then they start to drop off. Rarely do you see the guys that go into their 30s, like a Derrick Henry. I expect Christian McCaffrey to be up there. I expect Saquon Barkley to be up in that group playing into their 30s, but that also is some of the problem that arises with this running back market. There's just not enough guys that can do all of that, and that's where Saquon sort of touched on this topic a little bit when he brought it up, or when he was asked a question about the running backs and their longevity currently in the NFL, and he said that that's BS. Marcus Allen played until he was 36, 37 years old. Some of the greats that I admire and I look up and study, they played well into their 30s. Barry left at 29, 30, and he left in his prime. It's what you put in. What you put in is what you get out. That's any position. There's this weird thing with running backs right now. It's a difficult position. Is it a difficult position to play? Yes. Do you take a lot of wear and tear? Yes. But who are you or anyone else to tell me how long I can play the game? And he also mentioned that maybe when he's 32 or 33 years old, that's an area where he'd like to reach in his longevity of his career. And those were pretty strong words from Saquon, just calling it BS, what's going on right now with the running backs and teams determining for these players when and where, their value is, when they stop being valuable to a team. When you reach 28 years old, when everybody's telling you that you're not worth this much, that's pretty much it. It writes its own story for a lot of these running backs. But going back on Saquon and looking at him, for how talented he is, some of the negatives that come along with how talented he is and teams wanting to use his skill set to the best of their abilities or as much as they can, like the New York Giants have the last few years. You look at that and how much they use them. You want to talk about wear and tear. You look at the multiple ankle injuries, the torn ACL in his 3rd year, the foot injuries, the knee injuries as well to go along with that. But in Saquon's mind, he's saying that the knee injury to go along with a couple, 3 or 4 of his other injuries have been fluke or freak accidents that he can't do anything about, which could be true to an extent, but, it comes to a point where if you're saying 3 or 4 of them and the ACL injuries are flukes, then you're pretty much calling all of them a fluke. And I don't think it doesn't extend to that far when you're talking about the injuries at some point, but I can understand some of them. The knee, maybe I could give you as a fluke if you just stepped wrong, but to call almost all of them a fluke, you might be overextending it, but you can get the point that Saquon Barkley is trying to make. And this is where the question pops up that I wanted to ask, because is it health or is it just the fact that more of these running backs have to put in and get out more out of their production, out of what they do in the offseason to get them to prolong this career and get these other NFL teams to see them as valuable as they see themselves, if that makes sense. So to pose the question a different way, if that didn't make sense, do more running backs have to put in the work and put out the production of a Christian McCaffrey or a Saquon Barkley? Do more running backs have to do that? Or is it just as simple of a case to just be healthier and stay healthier longer into your 30s, limit the injuries by the time you get to there, and that'll really move the needle. And I think it was an interesting topic to bring up on today's show, just because you look at the running backs, and I mentioned that elite group of running backs that I think really distinguishes themselves from the rest. You have CMC, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon, Derrick Henry, and probably maybe like Bijan Robinson heading into that area. There's not a lot of them. There's only about those three guys that can do that and say that they're at that level, in my opinion, but those are the guys that I think are worth that amount of money. But again, there's not a lot of them. So why is that the case? What needs to happen for more running backs to, elevate themselves, to get these NFL teams to look at them a little bit differently? And you get to an area where you want to talk about production, which is the first part of that question. Is it more to do with the production, that they have to just do more, or is it just a simple case of staying healthy? And I know staying healthy isn't always up to you, isn't always up to the running backs to just say, I'm going to be healthy until 30. Obviously, with the wear and tear that comes with it, that is tough to do for any position, but especially running backs. But I think running backs now, when you look at it and answering that question, I think it has to do more so with the production, and that gives you a better chance to get these NFL teams to look at you differently, if that makes sense. Because if you look at the running backs, nowadays especially, running backs aren't only supposed to just run the ball, average about 4 or 5 yards per carry to be considered a good running back. Nowadays, you look at those three guys that I mentioned, all of them are able to catch, run the ball, line up in the slot, line up outside if they have to. They're expected to block and stay healthy on top of that. They're supposed to do all of that, and that's what NFL teams expect out of that position group now, and you're obviously going to get a better chance of getting all of that complete package when you go to a younger, more spry running back that can do it and be in there more consistently because of the wear and tear on the bodies. But I think now running backs are almost viewed like a smaller, more athletic tight end, if that makes sense. The expectations on running backs right now are a lot higher because the game has evolved so much in the passing game. Everyone's so talented right now. It just doesn't have to do with skill or athleticism anymore. Everybody is such at a higher level right now that I think running backs are expected to do so much more compared to where they were before, when Todd Gurley got his deal and some of those other guys started to get their money. Once they sort of started to fall off a little bit, then you started getting some of these doubts in with the NFL teams, whether or not these running backs can really do it. I think if all those guys really just produced a little bit more, and of course the health thing played into it, but it's almost like a double-edged sword when you're talking about this, because I said that production, to me, was the determining factor in getting, these NFL teams to look at these running backs a little bit different. But if you do produce, you do all these things that I mentioned: catch, run, block, line up everywhere, like Christian can do, like Saquon can do, like Derrick Henry can do most of it. You package that all together, but then you're not healthy at the end of the day. The expectations and staying healthy on top of that, I think that's where it becomes a little bit unfair, because you're asking the running backs to do so much on this offense, a lot more than maybe a running back or a quarterback could really honestly do in terms of just what you're bringing to that offense. If a wide receiver who's getting paid $30, $35 million per year isn't a great blocker or can't line up in the backfield like Deebo Samuel can, they're still going to get paid probably north of $28 million. And the running back who lines up outside, lines up in the backfield, blocks for you, runs the ball 20 to 30 times per game, he can't crack 16 or 17 million for everything that he's doing. And on top of that, he's expected to stay healthy and still produce more consistently over the next few games just to earn himself into that conversation of getting a double digit salary. That's where the discrepancy sort of pops up for me. That's where it becomes a little bit unfair. I think the expectations right now for running backs are a little bit too high, and that's why I said if the production doesn't meet it and you're staying at least relatively healthy, then you're not really going to be considered in an area where these teams are really considering paying you double digits, 12 million, 13, 15 million dollars because of unrealistic expectations, I would go as far as to say. And teams a lot of times I feel like make it just about health, but in reality with running backs doing all of that, you're bound to get hurt at some point. So you almost lose regardless of that. If you stay really healthy, a team can point out to the fact that, oh, you're super healthy, but you don't produce like a Christian or a Saquon. Why would we pay you close to that amount of money? But then if you do, in the games that you are healthy, produce up to that level, all right, but you missed like 8-7 games, so that's going to take your value down a little bit more, even though you're doing a lot more than all the other positions on the field, in some people's estimation, my estimation. So that's where I think Saquon's coming from a little bit, getting these teams to determine basically where your value lies isn't fair, is what I think Saquon was trying to say and what I was trying to get across in my point, because these teams, once you reach a certain age, they start bringing up all these things, your health, the production, and they use it against you when, again, the running back is nowadays expected to do a lot more in my eyes than a wide receiver in terms of just all-around game, contributing in areas outside of what you're just expected to do. The running backs clearly take the cake for that, and you see, it's no secret why the 49ers, as soon as they got Christian, they became an absolute juggernaut. Why the Titans have been so relevant with Derek, even though the rest of their team is all right to averagely good, they still remain relevant and in a lot of close games because Derek has been carrying them a lot in that area. So that's where the success attached to some of these great running backs, even though they're not getting paid like it, I don't think it's a surprise that the great teams have great running backs that do all these sort of things. And I think more NFL teams should see it. More NFL teams should pay some of these running backs accordingly. And hopefully for some of these young guys coming up like Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, some of those guys that are really leading the younger group, Breece Hall, hopefully I think all of them have a complete skill set, which is great, but it really just comes down to that health thing. If they could stay healthy and do everything, again, unrealistic expectations, but if they could do that, hopefully they can start changing the way NFL teams look at these running backs and how unfair some of these criteria that they have for them are. But that's what Saquon said. Let me know if you guys agree with what he said. Are running backs just being treated unfairly or are expected to do a lot more unrealistically than a lot of other positions? Leave your guys' thoughts in the chat box or in the comments section of this episode. But that'll wrap it up for that. We're going to go to a quick break, and when we return, we're going to talk some more AFC East, talking about Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator for the Bills, talking about Josh Allen, wanting to limit the amount of unscripted, superhuman-like plays from Josh Allen to not only keep him healthy, but to produce a more well-balanced offense in 2024. Stick around to find out what Joe Brady said on that right after this break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
We are back on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk about the Buffalo Bills. It's been a while that I have brought up the Buffalo Bills and their offense specifically, just because we're in a period right now where I think everybody knows what the situation is with the Buffalo Bills going on. They have a rookie wide receiver, ideally, it seems like, leading that group in terms of just pure wide receiver ability. Keon Coleman seems to be like the guy that will eventually become that wide receiver one, because other than that, you have Curtis Samuel, you brought in Marquez Valdes-Scantling, you have Khalil Shakir there, who's their only wide receiver that transitioned from last year into this year, that has caught a pass even from Josh Allen. That wide receiver group is very uncertain, hasn't really given a lot of people confidence after the Stephon Diggs trade to make you believe in 2024 that they're just going to continue this run of dominance. But then also you have the tight ends that you could throw in there. Very dynamic. Dalton Kincaid is looking very solid. But this offense, just now that Diggs is gone and offensive coordinator Joe Brady wants to mold it more around Josh Allen even more. He made that a point of emphasis, even if, I figured that was the case already, that this offense was built around Josh Allen. But I get what he was saying. Now that Diggs is gone, I guess it really is about Josh, now that you really know what you're going to get out of him, more so than what you're going to get out of any of the other guys. So, on that topic, Joe Brady mentioned on the Centered on Buffalo podcast, and he was asked about what they're doing this offseason, what is he working on with Josh Allen so far, knowing that this year could look a little bit different, obviously, with Stephon Diggs gone. And Joe Brady brought up the idea that he just wants Josh Allen to continue to master this offense and really continue his thirst and his hunger to try and improve and really know this offense like the back of his hand, because a lot of people forget that Joe Brady only came in like halfway through the year last year after they moved on from their previous offensive coordinator. Joe Brady came in halfway through the season, almost saved their season, and got them to change into more of a run, play action offense. You got a lot more out of James Cook, which was great. You now know that he could be another reliable option for you. But moving on from that, again, this is still a relatively new offense that Josh Allen probably doesn't know extremely well, and he's still learning that. But with that and learning the offense, Joe Brady touched on the idea about getting Josh to not really stop being Josh Allen, but maybe just to limit the amount of times we can see Josh running outside the pocket, taking on tacklers, and all that sort of stuff that makes him different. But Joe Brady had an idea to get him to at least limit it a little bit in 2024. He said, Josh is a great quarterback, but just wanting to see his thirst to get better. When you show him clips that, hey, you might have made an incredible play right here, but you didn't have to make an incredible play. How can we make it easier for you? You can make plays that nobody else in the world can do, but we don't need you to do it every snap. And another thing that Joe Brady wanted to hammer down on top of that I'm going to address in just a second, was the fact that the receivers, he wants to be on the same page as them. He really wanted to emphasize communication and wanted to get their point of view on a lot of their routes, a lot of their concepts from their point of view, and get them to see what he's seeing out there, to make sure everybody is on the same page as Josh, first and foremost, but just to make sure everybody knows what the game plan is, what to do when a play breaks down, so Josh isn't scrambling back there, breaking tackles, and then chucking it down the field, because a lot of times it looks great, but also with that you run the risk of Josh turning it over 2, maybe 3 times a game, and then that is stuttering the offense. That just doesn't look good. And then at the end of the day, talking big picture, people always go back to that with Josh Allen, talking about his turnovers and he's careless with the ball or he's trying to do too much. That always becomes, a talking down point on Josh. And I think it's a little unfair by one standpoint, but Joe Brady obviously notices it and he wants to limit that. And like he said, just make it easier for Josh, because the more he makes it easier for Josh, the easier it'll seem for Josh, obviously. Not to sound redundant, but it just is as simple as that. If it makes it simple for Josh and he doesn't have to do too much, he's going to have a cakewalk out there, just throwing it, knowing where everyone should be, making it a lot easier for him to just sit back there, go through his reads, go through the timing of everything. With the level of talent that he has, it's going to make it night and day, I believe. He doesn't have to be Superman on each and every play. But I think that's the biggest thing with Joe Brady and him addressing Josh Allen in this manner. It has been a problem, I guess you could say, since he was drafted. His recklessness almost, he has toned it down a little bit and has, harnessed that a little bit more now that we've seen him have continual playoff success. He's been the guy. The Buffalo Bills win games because of him. A lot of times because of that athletic ability. He has a huge frame, so using all of his abilities to make this offense as successful as possible is where you get Josh Allen, sometimes being off script or doing things that only he can do, like Joe Brady mentioned. But doing it every play, that's when it becomes a little bit dangerous. And that's where I would agree with Joe Brady to do it. But it comes at a weird time, ironically, because he's been doing it when he's been doing it the last few years when he's had a great offense with Stephon Diggs, Dawson Knox, Gabe Davis, James Cook here in the last couple of years, when his offense was on paper a lot better built up than the offense that he has right now. He was doing all this unscripted things, and he was doing all of this unnecessary superhuman abilities and actions on the football field that, if you look at it now, when his offense is a little bit worse, you don't know who your wide receiver one is going to be. You don't know basically who's going to step up to be that complementary piece to Josh Allen. You would expect him now to do all that superhuman things, to really put the team on his shoulder and take more of the burden now instead of back then. So I think it just comes at a weird time where you would almost make it okay right now for Josh Allen to do that because you know that your offense isn't as good, so you rely more on him to do all these unscripted magical plays that he just creates something out of nothing now, more so instead of before when he had all the weapons to him. It should have been easier before, but now Joe Brady's trying to limit that now, and that's where the question pops up that what level of confidence do you guys have, does Joe Brady have in the rest of the supporting cast to ask something like this of Josh Allen, right? Because it is one thing to do it because you want to preserve him. You don't want him to get hurt, taking all these hits, running for those extra yards, feeling the need that he has to do that to give the Bills the best chance of winning. You understand where he's coming from. He's coming from a great place, but obviously you want to keep him healthy, so you know what Joe Brady is asking. But at the same time, can you rely on a rookie receiver, Keon Coleman, to get open 50% of the time, 60% of the time? Can you rely on Dalton Kincaid for as good as he looked in his first year? Can you really rely on him to take another big step like that in his second year? He has a good chance of doing it, but until you see it, I think it still remains something that a lot of people feel uneasy about. Then also the same thing goes with James Cook. How does he improve off of last year, improving just his production, his numbers, and how he just looked playing out there on the field? He looked a lot more at ease and more confident out there to me, so how much better can he get in his second year, or in his next year, I should say? Then Khalil Shakir, do you have something in him? Do you really have a lot of confidence in him to be your number 2, number 3 wide receiver? How's Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Curtis Samuel going to look when they've never caught a pass from Josh Allen before? When they get into a game, are they going to be on the same page right away? I just listed off probably like 6 questions right there that makes you doubt the supporting cast of Josh Allen. So for Joe Brady to implement this now, it could be, wrong timing in a lot of people's minds, and I certainly have my questions about it. But overall, I think Joe Brady almost has to do this because you can't just keep having Josh do all these things off a script. And even Joe Brady mentioned it. He mentioned this saying during that interview that he wants Josh to just make routine plays routinely, more so than he has in the past, just because it keeps the offense in a flow and it keeps everything basically just in a structure. You have better control of the outcome if you know what's going to happen, if you know what the reads are. And if nothing's there, you just throw it away rather than having Josh Allen risk it all on this money gamble throw down the field or trying to squeeze it into a tight window and then just throwing an interception or turning it over on downs. Joe Brady wants to limit that, wants to create more ebbs and flow in this offense, and I can't blame him. With more structure, you'd think it would benefit a new wide receiver group, that young tight end group, a young running back as well. But again, the level of uncertainty you feel with this team, I think a lot of it will come down to and will be determined on how much they follow this plan, this idea of keeping Josh Allen a little bit more under control. A lot of it will depend on the wins and losses. Obviously, the wins cure everything, whereas the losses, if you get 3 in a row or 2 in a row, it's almost like the end of the world, and everyone is already starting to hit the panic button if that'll become the case. And it's just weird to think about the timing of all of this, how Joe Brady is doing it. I feel like he has no choice but to do this, but again, my trust in the supporting cast right now would probably be at about a 5, maybe a 6 at most out of 10 right now. Not one guy right now in July jumps out at me to say, all right, he's going to be the go-to guy. It could be multiple of these guys if they prove me wrong, or it could be none of them, and they could really struggle this year. I think that's another confusing thing about the Bills. They lost a lot. They're trying to implement a lot of new pieces, but you don't really know how it's going to turn out until you see the production of it and how it either develops or how it just gets even worse as the season goes on. But this is what you get on the flip side with Josh Allen. If he truly is one of the great quarterbacks, and this is almost an unfair statement to say, but if you do trust him this much, and if he is that quarterback you want people to believe he is, that people put him in these conversations with Patrick, he should be able to elevate this team to, getting them to win games, being the reason that they win games by his production, not being Superman, but just making the right plays when he has to, and keeping it all under control like Joe Brady is trying to get him to do. And is that an unfair thing to do to Josh Allen? Maybe, if you compare him to Patrick Mahomes and things like that. But that is the territory that he finds himself in now. With all that success, you're expected to, elevate your team at some point. People look at Josh and compare him to Patrick, obviously, and look at him as, all right, well, you have Josh Allen, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. This team has to be good because of that. Again, unfair expectations just on Josh, in my estimation, because that supporting cast, I always say it about rookies, and it stays true for 10-year, 5-year veterans, MVP candidates. The supporting cast is just as important, and it is unfair from that standpoint, but again, how these wins potentially turn to losses, or these losses and wins, sort of roll out in 2024 will be a big determinant in that. And I'll be interested to see if they go away from it, if they find themselves in a losing streak or something like that, and they desperately need a win. Are they going to throw this conservative, strategy out the window, and Joe Brady's just going to let Josh Allen go crazy out there to do anything that he can to win? I'll be interested to see that, how this all develops. The Bills are a very interesting team to keep an eye on because of all the uncertain factors, but again, they have Josh Allen, so all their games should be interesting, honestly, in 2024. I'm looking forward to watching them, but that'll be that for that segment. That's what Joe Brady is trying to implement to Josh Allen in this coming season. We have two more topics to talk about on today's show. Tyreek Hill mentioned some comments on his contract negotiations and his level of confidence in getting those done. And also, free agent safety Justin Simmons talks about what he can bring to a contending team in free agency on when somebody could potentially sign him. It's been pretty quiet right now, but he has the utmost confidence in him that he could be a difference maker on whoever decides to sign him potentially in 2024. We'll get to those two topics in just a few seconds. Don't go anywhere.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Jumping right back into the action on today's show, talking some more on the contract negotiations with the Dolphins, but not so much Tua Tagovailoa, this time around Tyreek Hill, because this year is the last year Tyreek Hill will get guaranteed money in his contract, but the base salary this year is going to be around 19.6, and then after that, the base salaries, while it's not guaranteed money technically up front, the base salaries in 2025 are set to be 21.8, and then in 2026 it's going to jump up tremendously to 43.9. That's where, even though he is technically getting paid around $30 million per year, because it is so heavily stocked towards the last year of that deal, that's where it sort of averages out to $30 million. He's just not getting that really every year because it was so, pushed far back on this contract. That's where you get that $30 million per year average. And because the salary is that high, the cap hits in 2025 are going to be 34.2, and then in 2026, when his base salary is nearly $45 million, his cap hit is set to be at about $56 million against the cap for the Miami Dolphins. So with that being, the facts of it, the matter of fact of the situation with Tyreek, a lot of people are expecting, that rework deal to come at some point soon for the Miami Dolphins and for Tyreek Hill, because he reset the wide receiver market only 2 years ago, and now he's trying to see where he fits in this new market where Justin Jefferson reset it just this offseason, now getting paid $35 million per year. People are expecting Tyreek Hill and the Dolphins to rework this deal just because the Dolphins can't take that big of a cap hit. That's ridiculous to take in a deal. So it should shed some cap space for Miami once they rework it. But when that does happen, the timing of that with Tua's deal is something that I wanted to get to and discuss on today's show. But before I do that, I wanted to mention what Tyreek Hill said on the new wide receiver market, which was, so very proud of these guys. Happy for obviously my teammate Waddle getting his new deal. For guys like me, that's great. I'm 30 years old, also looking for a new deal. So very, very excited to see where I fit in to this category. And he also most recently spoke with ESPN to say that he knows that the Miami Dolphins will end up doing what's right when it comes time for him to get his deal done. But with that, I think there's a lot to unpack with just that statement. He mentioned that the main focus for him is just helping this team, this organization, bringing a championship to the community here in Miami. But back to that comment I mentioned, paraphrasing it, when he spoke to ESPN, he said that he knows that Miami will do what's right when it comes time for him to get his deal done. And it's pretty interesting when you say something like that, just because it's all business, right? You always want to try and get the other side to make a move, applying that bit of pressure, saying some underlying comment to, get the point across. And obviously Tyreek wants to get paid. Tyreek deserves to get paid just off of last year. He probably has earned himself more than $30 million per year on a rework deal. But the timing of it is the most crucial thing. For him to say this now in a time where we really haven't heard anything close to being done or something like that with Tua and his contract negotiations, for him to say that when it comes time for the Dolphins to, rework his deal, he knows that they're going to do the right thing, obviously alluding to the fact that paying him is the right thing to do. And will the Dolphins, as you guys see on your screen, resolve Tua or Tyreek's contract first after hearing some more of these comments from Tyreek, applying more pressure to the Dolphins? Almost to me, how I, evaluate it is who's going to get done first. Tyreek wanting, obviously, to get this deal done sooner rather than later, just because of how everything is working out in the wide receiver market. But with these comments now, I think the Dolphins are put in a very weird situation where Tyreek's almost putting his trust and saying, I have so much trust in the Dolphins that I know they're going to do right by me. I know they're going to pay me accordingly for all that I've done for them on the football field. I know when it comes time to pay up, to pay me accordingly, they're going to do it because we have that level of trust. We have that level of understanding without really saying that he's expecting a new contract eventually from the Miami Dolphins. And the timing of it, like I said, is weird because Tua, obviously the quarterback of this team, coming off one of his best years, if not his best year, is also looking for a lot of money, arguably, because of who's getting paid, the market price. Tua has made a good case for himself to be paid that amount of money, just based on what he did last year. Who's getting paid $50 to $55 million? You put the numbers up close to one another, the accolades and all that sort of thing, the success in the NFL, he lines up right where some of these new guys are getting some of these new contract deals done. And the Dolphins, quite frankly, can, again, similarly to the 49ers, can't afford to have too many of these guys paying market price for a lot of them. You already paid Jalen Waddle about $27, $28 million per year. Tyreek is already at $30 million per year, technically. So if he wants more, it's going to be, worse for the Dolphins. They already used a lot of their cap space to make the rest of their team better, which I fully support because I think defensively they could have used some help. They got it this offseason, so there's no problem with that. But when you have great players like this, these are the sort of problems that you have to balance out and almost have to make a decision now because Tua, like I mentioned, has been going on for a while. His negotiations have been going on all offseason, and Tyreek, it almost seems like just now, is bringing up the idea of fitting into this new reset wide receiver market where he's already getting paid, I think, as a top 5 wide receiver, but now he's putting some more pressure on the Dolphins to pay him a little bit more. And again, it's hard to argue with him because of the season that he just put up being so crucial to the Dolphins. You're stuck between a rock and a hard place because he's making a good point, but also your quarterback is obviously the quarterback and how people view the quarterback in a decision where you have to choose who you get done first. Most people would choose the quarterback, but it is all, circumstantial because I think a lot of people aren't too convinced about Tua. So in this situation, whose contract situation would get resolved first? In my opinion, this is tough. In my opinion, between Tua or Tyreek, whose gets done first? I would probably say Tyreek. Because, again, it goes back to what I said already with Brandon Ayuk's deal. If you really want to get it done, you'd get it done already. That's my biggest thing. I don't like to hang around too much with teams saying that they want to get it done. We want to pay him. He's a crucial part to this team. If you really believe it, you got to do it. I know the financials take a long time, but this has been going on all off season. You're talking about the quarterback too. It's not like we're talking about a linebacker or a running back or a wide receiver. The quarterback, on how it's valued in today's game, this should have been done probably already. It should have already been done. And for them to continue to dance around it, and Tyreek Hill now considered one of the best wide receivers and applying a little bit more pressure with his last statement, I think the Dolphins would probably get a new reworked deal done with Tyreek before they even get to Tua. And then what sort of message does that send to Tua? You get Tyreek Hill a new deal while he's been working on this all summer. How does he feel about that? What message does that send to Tua on this kind of season that he provided for this team, for them to still not value him that high and continue to push this off is a very tricky situation to be right now for the Miami Dolphins. The cap is limited, again, obviously, because they addressed other parts of their team. And right now, who is making the most impact on that team? I think you can make a good case for either of them. But to me, I think Tyreek, what you're going to get 100%. Unless he's, injured or something like that, that you're going to get top 5, top 3 level numbers from Tyreek. And you could even say that you can put almost any quarterback in there and he's going to get his numbers. That's the level that you're going to get with Tyreek. Whereas with Tua, I've been on the show saying that I want them to pay Tua. I think based on what everybody else is getting, he should get paid. But the biggest question with that is I don't think the Dolphins view him in a spot right now where they think that he could produce this year in and year out. I would give him the benefit of the doubt, but I don't think the Dolphins are there right now. I think they're more convinced with what Tyreek has shown them already, with what his reputation is in the NFL, and that's why I believe they're actually going to pay Tyreek quicker and resolve his situation quicker before they get to Tua. And then at that point, how much cap space do you have to dance around with where you could still offer Tua what he's looking for and resolve the situation and move on going forward? Because I think Dolphins players want Tua to stay, but again, it's a business at the end of the day. I wouldn't be surprised if this carries on into a good chunk of training camp that is just set to start this week or next week for the Miami Dolphins. So it's an ongoing situation. It keeps getting dragged out like all of these contract negotiations for these big players do, but we'll definitely keep our tabs on it and talk about it, I'm sure, some more throughout the rest of the offseason. But we have one more segment to get to on Justin Simmons. Still remains a free agent, one of the better remaining free agents left on the market. He believes that he can contribute a lot to any team that signs him, but when will he get signed still remains the question. I'll try to answer that when we return after this break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Thank you for joining me on this last segment on today's show. We're going to recap just one free agent situation before we get on out of here on today's episode. Regarding free agent safety Justin Simmons, he was released this offseason by the Denver Broncos in March, actually, because of just salary cap situation. What he was getting, paid as his salary just wasn't going to line up with what the Broncos were looking to do going forward, obviously with how everything fell apart with Russell Wilson and them just being in a huge hole, in a huge debt after, having to pay off that massive contract. It didn't make sense to keep Justin Simmons on the roster because he is getting paid around $15 million per year after that initial 4-year deal that he received a few years ago. That $61 million deal, 4-year deal. He's getting paid around $15 million. You can't have that on the books, trying to rebuild and climb yourself out of this hole that you've dug yourself into. So he still remains a free agent. He is still one of the more sought out free agents, I would imagine, along with guys like Stephon Gilmore and Connor Williams in that market. But he recently talked at a charity golf event last Thursday and caught up with, the media caught up with Justin Simmons on where his situation stands, if they could get any sort of inclination of what his next step could be in his career. And basically he said he believes that he'll end up signing to a place where he's valued, and he's just remaining patient at the end of the day. That's what he wanted to get across to the media. But more specifically, he said in a brief statement, "I've always said from the jump that I want to play for a contender, and I feel like I can be the missing piece for a lot of teams to get them over the hump." And it's hard to argue with him from a standpoint that he has built a pretty decent reputation in the NFL already. In the last few years, I want to say since he was 27, 28 years old to now being a 30-year-old, I think that period was really a stint where people looked at him as a top 5, top 4 safety in the NFL, and how he impacted that Denver Broncos defense, because even if their offense was a little discombobulated, they weren't really figuring out the quarterback situation on defense, you had him anchoring that whole unit. You had then draft Pat Surtain to combine with him. That defense was still looking pretty solid as a unit, but obviously with how the cap rolled out, you couldn't keep him, and that's just a decision that you have to make at the end of the day. But based on salary, on what he's making right now, Justin Simmons is still just outside of the top 5 highest paid safeties in the NFL after some more recently got their new deal. So he is still getting paid pretty decently in the safety market, but right now where he is, it is a weird situation if we're trying to answer the question of when do we expect Justin Simmons to get signed, because like I mentioned, he was released in March, so now we're almost halfway through July, or just about halfway through July, and we haven't seen anything really start to gain traction, nothing really heating up with any team in particular. So when is this going to happen? When is something going to get resolved? No clear indication of it up until now. Justin Simmons said he could even sign tomorrow. he could sign 2 weeks into training camp, maybe just before the first game of the regular season. He's keeping all of his options open and just really banking on the fact that people will look at his tape, look at his resume, and see that adding him could do a lot more positive to their team, a lot more good to their team than just waiting out and rolling out with whoever they have at safety right now. And if you just look at him recently in 2023 with Denver, which ultimately ended up being his last year, he led the team in interceptions with 3. He was second in passes defended with 8. Pat Surtain was first on the team with 12. And he had 70 total tackles at 30 years old. But clearly the Broncos saw that production and it wasn't worth $15 million in salary to them. So he moves on now as a free agent. And where do we stand right now with Justin Simmons? It's tough because if you look at the safety market that I alluded to before, the top 5 highest paid safeties, they're all right now in their first, major big deal. When Justin Simmons got this 4-year, $61 million deal, that was his big payday. That was his first initial market resetting, deal for him. And the Broncos thought that was going to be a good deal. And right now, the highest paid safeties are all in that stage of their career. So they're all young. They're pretty much in their primes right now. And when teams look at a guy like Justin Simmons, they look at him at 30 years old. And that, again, scares them off a little bit, like with the running back market and the cornerback market a little bit as well. When you start pushing 30, 31 years old, I think Stephon Gilmore's at least 32 or something like that. Teams are a lot more cautious and a lot more hesitant to go out there and seek these guys because they'd much rather side on the side of youth than go over an experienced guy that could get hurt a lot more just because of age. The health is always a major concern with these players. And I think I talked about it before in a previous segment, talking about Stephon Gilmore actually, on how it's so tricky with corners and safeties because right now where they stand as veteran players in this league, if they want to truly make an impact, they have to be in and around the ball. They have to be making plays, get deflections, get interceptions, and then just be around the ball. Just be a menace everywhere on that secondary. But with how the NFL is rolling nowadays, with how quarterbacks are, and to the level that they're playing, and that the offenses are getting so much more creative, there's so much more leeway for the offensive side of the ball than the defensive side of the ball. On the defensive side of the ball, if you're trying to get paid, oftentimes, with how good these offenses are, it could really limit how much you impact the game, because if you're playing safety and you're covering one half of the field, that's great. You're shutting it down. No one's looking that way, but that's the problem. No one's looking that way. They're picking apart the other side of the field, and they're still putting up 18, 20, over 25 points or something like that on your defense, and you're getting paid all this money to just not really be a factor. And that's unfair, of course, because you can't really determine that, but that's where the NFL is nowadays. It's all about points, scoring points, and the defensive side of the ball is almost taking a major hit, getting devalued in a lot of their positions, especially in free agency, where teams are more so going out there and overpaying maybe for a wide receiver or a quarterback just to have them on their team, because they know that the NFL is shifting more into this pass-heavy, points-heavy era right now that we are in the NFL. It's hard to pick up a 30-plus-year-old corner and expect them to be shutting down teams where oftentimes they get the short end of the stick. They're getting called for pass interference. They're getting called for holding. And it's hard to really make an impact that way. So that's where I think the issues lie with a guy like Justin Simmons, a guy like Stephon Gilmore, even though I believe he could make an impact on a team like the Buffalo Bills, who moved on from both of their safeties, the New York Jets, finding themselves in a spot right now where the next 2 to 3 years is their window to win right now. I think Justin Simmons can contribute if we're talking about 2 or just 3 years. Even the Seattle Seahawks, more of a rebuilding situation, but they need a safety, obviously, for moving on from their previous one. And even the Philadelphia Eagles, he says he wants to play for a contender. Reed Blankenship is there. You brought back CJ. Maybe you sign Justin Simmons and just take on the last year of his contract this year that is expected to expire after 2024, and just have him in there as a 1-year tryout and then move on from him. those are some of the options I see as the more likely ones for Justin Simmons, but that's another issue with this. With Simmons on the final year of his deal, with teams, having to sign him on that 1-year deal, with him expiring after 2024, and then having to work out a whole nother deal with Justin Simmons. What's that going to look like? What are those negotiations going to look like? Is the team going to find it valuable to try and renegotiate after 1 year of having Justin Simmons on their team? All these things come into consideration when you're talking about veterans, especially corners, like I mentioned, and how tricky it is right now for them just based on where the NFL is going. But when would he get signed? I would probably say at some point during training camp. You don't like to see injuries happen, but I think someone out there is going to need one. The depth is going to be looking a little bit thin at some of these positions. I think it's going to look more intriguing as we head into August after a preseason game or something, that more teams are going to start reaching out to Gilmore, to Justin Simmons, and some of these guys. I think he'll get signed halfway through training camp if I were to put an exact date on it, but that's just me. Tricky situation to go through, but right now, that's where it is. That's where the defensive market right now is for some of these veteran guys. So that's where we're going to leave that segment, and that's where we're going to leave the show. Justin Simmons, hopefully he gets signed soon. I think he still has a lot to give. But that'll wrap it up for this episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, and also follow the network on all forms of social media as well. If you want to see more of this show on YouTube, check out the GSMC Podcast Network channel and the GSMC Sports Network channel for various forms of NFL content on both of those channels. And as a final reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more topics and discussions around the NFL with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you again for joining me, and I hope to see you guys back here again discussing some more topics with me tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.